Hello, Cherries fans. Welcome back to another edition of SPARKY'S Stats here on the Cherries Red Army YouTube channel. Now, as I'm sure you can imagine, there wasn't really much of a way to spin the terrible stats that we've had after several losses in a row since the return from the World Cup. However, despite the disappointment of that late equaliser from Surridge, there were some little bright rays of light peeking through the dull clouds of our most recent performances that I think we can look at stats-wise based on the Forest game. Now, first quick bit to look at was, and I don't want to be teaching people to suck eggs on this one because it sounds so incredibly basic, but one of the biggest things when looking at the possession stats for the Bournemouth team against Forest is just how much more involved the attackers were in terms of receiving passes and how many more touches they got in the match. I know, who knew? Get your attackers to touch the ball more and you might make something happen. However, for Bournemouth, it just hasn't been that simple over the last few games. Now, these are the possession stats from FBref.com against Forest. And the ones that I've highlighted here is just pure and simply number of touches in this case. Now, obviously, you can see here, Jordan Zamora was heavily involved in the game. Jefferson Lerma getting in the kind of performance we haven't seen from him in a while, I think. Jaden Anthony, Kiefer Moore, attacking players. Lerma slightly excluded from that. But you wouldn't believe when you go back really how many defenders dominate the top of these charts in previous games. But I think more importantly for us is who was receiving the passes. It's all good and well having a touch, but if you don't do anything with it, if you don't get the ball forward, it's not going to matter. The top three players that received the most passes for Bournemouth against Forest were our front three. Again, this sounds so basic, but it really hasn't been happening for Bournemouth whatsoever. You only need to look back at some other matches, even the better performance that we've had. If you look here against Everton, yes, Marcus Tavernier, Philip Billing and Kiefer Moore receiving a lot of passes in that game, but Dominic Solanke is much further down. And this was our strongest win of the season in terms of wins so far. That 3-0 against Everton. Even Leeds United, yes, we obviously conceded 4 in that game, but we did score 3. If you score 3 goals, you think your attackers would get the ball a lot more. But no, Adam Smith and Marco Senesi are 3rd and 4th, or 4th and 3rd respectively, in terms of receiving the most, in terms of taking the most touches, and those that receive the most passes. Marcus Tavernier, Kiefer Moore and Jefferson Lerma are nicely high up there, but you've still got your defenders here. Philip Billings way down, Dominic Solanke right near the bottom again. Again, you need to get more of your attacking players involved further up the pitch, and certainly whilst Marcus Tavernier tends to be very heavily involved in games previously that we've had, and Jordan Zamora was in this one, it really was the fact that we were getting the ball forward to our attackers and allowing them to have a bigger impact on the game. And admittedly, we didn't finish things off, unfortunately, and we tailed off a little bit in the second half. But that's a very brief look at a stat that looked good for us in that game, which has been difficult to find. Amongst those, if you look at, we made 28 passes. We had 28 touches in the opposition penalty area, which is right up there in the top 5 in terms of the most we've had this season. Interesting one, while I was looking up the stats for this video, our win against Aston Villa, first game of the season, we had 9 touches in the opposition penalty area, according to FBref. That's only worse. That's the only 2 games that's better than was our defeat against Villa and Liverpool and our defeat against Man City. Against Arsenal 2 weeks later, where we lost 3-0, we had almost double the amount of touches in the opposition penalty area and obviously didn't score in that game. Taking the touches further up the pitch doesn't mean everything, but you certainly want to get touches up the pitch in order to start actually getting some goals, which is something that we'd all kill for, I think, in terms of the Bournemouth impacts that we've had in our last few games. Now, speaking of attackers, obviously the big news was Dango Ouattara starting, and obviously he started on the right wing, played 90 minutes, but that also meant that the person that has been playing on the right wing more recently, Ryan Christie, was forced inside. What was Ouattara doing? How well did Ouattara do in that game? And what can we sort of expect to see more from Christie if he is being told to now play in a different position to the one that he generally plays for, or generally plays at Bournemouth? So coming on to SofaScore, we're going to have a look at the heat maps from both players. And the interesting things to sort of look at compared to what Christie typically does on the right-hand side versus what he does now, and similarly compare that to Dango Ouattara's performance on the right wing. And I think the most notable thing on here is just how much more Ouattara stuck to the right wing. So much more touches here that really sort of kept himself with, the phrase I used ages back was keeping chalk on his boots for the likes of David Brooks when he was doing that under Parker last year. Obviously had a little bit of an impact defensively. I thought was really pleased with how much work he was putting in defensively as well, including a block on the line as well, a header from a shot in the first half. But then when he gets forward, he gets into the box. You see this patch of touches that were in the box. A few of those were from shots that unfortunately really weren't as good as we would have liked them to be. I mean, you can see here on the right-hand side a shot late on that just flew miles wide, and we would like to see a little bit more of him, producing decent shots going forward. But he certainly had his impact, obviously providing the assist. But the difference, obviously, between him and Ryan Christie is that, from what we've heard, he's far more two-footed. His assist was with his right foot. I think he had another opportunity where he really should have provided another goal before he did, when he got to the byline and provided a cross back, which he ended up hitting straight at the keeper rather than pulling it to Anthony. But if you compare that to what Ryan Christie tends to do from the right wing, you'll see this is the game against Manchester United, where he actually had 63 touches. He had more in that game against United far more than he did against in a number of his other matches that he's played for us. But a lot more safe passing. 91% accuracy in his passing sounds good, but it depends on whether you're passing that forward or not. And as you can see here, really didn't actually get into dangerous areas, really into the box, into much more dangerous areas. And as I've labelled criticism Ryan Christie a lot, tends to go sideways a lot. And as you can see, there's much more of a sort of an arc far too far out from the goal of him actually coming inside, trying to get himself more involved in play, but we want him to see him on the end of things a lot more often, as much as he likes to be involved in build-up. Then, as a further example against Brentford, here, a lot more involved in build-up, sticking a lot more to the right-hand side. But again here, while he does push down the wing a decent bit, when he comes inside, it's that sideways movement again. It's almost like he's creating a barrier between himself and the penalty area. This one touch in here, just barely creeping inside the penalty area, but so much more action outside of it. And that is what we hope to be very different from Ouattara. He's actually getting himself more involved in the game. Now, the caveat to these, and when just talking more about this game, you must remember this wasn't a great Forest performance. And even then, it was somewhat 50-50 at times between the two of us, as much as I feel as though we definitely looked like the more likely to go on to win the game and obviously produce the better chances. In the end, we couldn't make it count. So that's the big difference that we need from players like Ouattara and those that we're hoping to bring in within the next week and a half. As mentioned, though, with Ouattara taking that right wing spot, what has that done to Christie? Well, as you can see here, he takes up two spaces specifically, I would say, is that firstly, he actually wants to come onto that right-hand side again. And if he continues to do that, that'd be great. We just need Adam Smith to push forward a little bit more as well in order to create those overloads on the right-hand side of the pitch with combinations of Ouattara, Christie, Smith, and maybe even Lerma or whoever's playing on the right of the central midfield partnership joining in. And the other interesting bit is Ryan Christie taking up the left half space as well. Just for those of you unfamiliar with half space as a terminology, if you draw up lines in you if you cut the pitch into 5 portions lengthways, so you have your wide parts of the pitch, which are just your right hand side and your left hand side of the pitch. You have the middle, and then the bits in between that, and that's what we call the half spaces. And those are very popular, particularly for modern wingers, because that's where you will typically be able to get in between the centre back and the full back, where you can gain a lot of success as an attacker. So FBref has decided to just reset on me, kind of, unfortunately. There we go. I can bring that back up again. So he's taking this left half space up, which is allowing him to combine a lot more centrally, obviously, with the likes of Anthony Zamora and even Rothwell on the left-hand side. In fact, I felt Rothwell actually had a few nice moments on the left-hand side, combining with Anthony and Zamora. He was much more involved on the left here. And then we want Christie to be getting into the box as well, as he did with a little bit more on the left here, and obviously this particular chance, which he didn't put away, unfortunately. But that's what I want to see more from of Christie. Now, his stats here don't come out particularly well. I think his passing wasn't as good as maybe it could have been, but I do feel as though there were more moments that Christie was actually being more forward-thinking, more progressive with, actually producing the kind of passes that we want to see from him, that he was doing more so of in the Championship, as opposed to the rather safe and sideways that he's very typically associated with by Bournemouth fans of him basically after the first sort of dozen games of the Championship that we saw him. Want to see him getting more involved in the box, producing more good chances, more shots, and maybe even a header hitting the target or two, as opposed to this particular game. So those were the two things I just wanted to look at specifically, sort of like the fact that we were getting forward, and also out of the forwards, what are they doing? What can we expect going forward? Now, obviously, we have more rumours that are going to be about, more rumours that Kirk and I have already discussed about players coming in. But just one final thing I do want to point out, and sort of like hopefully an indication of the kind of players that we're looking at, and from rumours that we've had so far, and including obviously Ouattara coming in anyway, what I think Gary O'Neill is going to hopefully sort of be going for moving forward. If we look here, this is stats coming from The Analyst, which is an Opta site, so very, very good data. This is our PPDA, or the list of, or I'm focusing rather on the PPDA. Now, this is one I've mentioned before. For those of you who haven't watched the Sparky Stat video before, PPDA stands for passes per defensive action. So the smaller that number is, right up here with your Leeds and your Chelseas and your Eddie Howe's Newcastles, they press a lot more. They don't allow their opposition to put many passes together before they attack them and try and force them into a mistake. As opposed to down here, you have your weakest pressers. Now, that doesn't mean you don't press at all. It just means you let your opposition have a lot of passes without any pressure before you try and attack them. And this is more indicative of a strategy. If you can actually sort of buy into that strategy of just allowing the opposition to have the ball where they want it in their own half, then when they come forward, you try and win the ball off them, get it quick, and then counter. To do that, you need to have the stamina left over. You need to have the pace and the trickery and the athleticism to attack from deep. And Bournemouth have sadly missed pace amongst their team, something that Eddie Howe noticed immediately after, when he said he came up, as soon as he came up to the Premiership, the first time around, he said he wanted to add pace to the team. Whereas for us, this time around, we just haven't done that. We still have the likes of Ryan Christie on the wing, who may have trickery at his time, but isn't very fast and isn't going to be able to make those moves. Kiefer Moore, while he has his strategies that you can, the strategies you can use and the long ball games that we can play, he's not got the pace to be able to really deal with the counter-attacking moves from deep. So what I'm hoping is, with the likes of Ouattara coming in, and then the lad from Villarreal, which that move seems to be up in the balance a little bit at the moment based on medicals. we need the players that have got the ability to, once we have the ball, really push on an attack. Because what we really haven't tried to do this season is actually win the ball high up the pitch. It's just not been part of the game plan. If you notice our high turnovers, Bournemouth have the fewest high turnovers in the division. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I don't think it reflects all that well. But again, that's more indicative of a strategy as much as we have also been ineffectual at whatever strategies we have over the last few weeks anyway. Similarly, we don't tend to create many shots. We've got the lowest amount of shots from high turnovers. We have actually scored 2 goals from high turnovers this season. Thoughts in the comments as to what those 2 goals are. I have a feeling they both came in the same game. But see if you can remember which ones those are. But in order to maintain this low pressing style, you need to be having a very good counter-attacking game. And in order to make the most of that, you need players that can actually enact that strategy. And to back up that even further as to, like, you know, how much of an impact the pressing has had on the games recently and other successful games. In this match here against Nottingham Forest, this is understat.com. One of the stats they can produce is a PPDA for that particular match. If you see here, 19.5. That's an incredibly high number for a PPDA stat. And yet, we were really able to make the most of the possession that we had. And like I mentioned right at the start of the video, get the ball to our strikers quickly. Nottingham Forest pressed a lot more, but I really don't think they were that effectual at the pressing in our pressing game. Pull it back here to our game against Everton. Again, arguably our best, most complete performance of the season with a 3-0 victory, 22.43. Everton tried to press and press and press and press and press. 5.5 is an incredibly low number. And yet, they weren't effectual at all. We just passed around them. And whenever Everton had the ball, we didn't even try to really get the ball off them. Game state comes into that to an extent. Obviously, we went ahead, and from that point on, you don't need to necessarily press your opposition that much. But just another stat, just to show that I think it's very clear Gary Neal wants not as much of a press, wants to be much more reactive, which is fair enough when you are one of the weaker teams. But in order to make more of a counter-attack situations where you've got to look at goals against Leeds, goals against Fulham, and in other situations as well, the likes of our previous game against Forest, there's quite a few good counter-attacking goals we've scored this season. In order to be able to do that more, you need the pace to be able to take advantage of the counter-attacks. And I'm hoping that is the strategy that we're looking at in terms of players that we're trying to bring in January. Anyway, those are my thoughts. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please do give it a like and let me know what you thought in the comments. Do subscribe if you are enjoying this content and want to see more opinions and videos about Bournemouth and particularly their transfer activity over the coming week and a half before the window closes. Regardless, I hope you have a wonderful day and we hope to see you again right here on Cherries Red Army very soon. Up the cherries.